I never expected my best friend's mom to look at me the way she did that night, as if I was the only one who could make her feel alive again. I hadn't been to my best friend's house in months. Life had pulled me in different directions. Work, classes, late nights where exhaustion replaced conversation. When I finally rang the familiar doorbell, it felt almost nostalgic, like stepping back into a place where time moved slower. But when the door opened, I froze for a second. It wasn't my friend who stood there. It was his mother. I remembered her, of course. She had always been kind, always smiling, always the sort of presence that made a house feel like a home. But this time, something felt different. She was standing there in a simple blouse and jeans, her hair loosely tied back, strands framing her face. The years had only added a kind of grace to her that startled me. She didn't just look good for her age. She looked radiant. Her smile was warm and familiar, but there was a spark in her eyes I hadn't noticed before. "You're here," she said, her voice soft, carrying the faintest note of surprise and, if I wasn't imagining it, delight. Before I could respond, she stepped forward and pulled me into a hug. It wasn't a long embrace, but long enough for me to notice how gentle yet steady her arms felt around me. The faint scent of her perfume lingered, floral with a hint of spice, and it clung to my shirt even after she let go. My heartbeat quickened, and I told myself it was only because I hadn't expected such a warm greeting. She stepped back, looking me over with a tilt of her head, her smile softening. "You've changed," she said, almost to herself. "You look older." I laughed nervously, rubbing the back of my neck. Guess time doesn't stand still for any of us. Her eyes lingered on me for a heartbeat longer than I thought they would, and then she gestured for me to come inside. The house was the same in so many ways. The framed family photos along the wall, the faint creak in the hallway floorboards, the warm hum of a space that had lived through countless ordinary days. Yet as I followed her inside, I couldn't help but notice her presence filling the space more than it used to. Maybe it was because I was older now, more aware. Or maybe it was simply that I hadn't truly seen her until this moment. As she led me toward the living room, her hand brushed lightly against my arm. It was a casual touch, almost accidental, but the warmth of it stayed with me. My mind replayed that moment in slow motion. The way her fingers grazed against my sleeve, how natural it felt, and how strangely reluctant I was to let the sensation fade. I told myself not to overthink it. She was just being kind, just being the same warm-hearted woman she had always been. And yet, even as I sat down on the familiar sofa, I couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted between us. Something I couldn't quite name, but could already feel. Later that evening, the house settled into its usual rhythm. My friend disappeared upstairs, lost in some online game that would probably keep him occupied for hours. The television murmured softly in the background, but the living room felt strangely empty without him. I wandered into the kitchen, drawn by the faint clink of china and the low hum of water boiling. She was there, standing by the counter with her back to me, her hair falling loose now, catching the light in soft strands. She turned at the sound of my footsteps and smiled, that easy, warm smile that made the room feel less like a place and more like a memory. "Tea?" she asked, holding up 2 cups as if she had already guessed my answer. I nodded, and a few minutes later we sat across from each other at the small kitchen table. The glow of the overhead light softened the lines of her face, and the quiet between us felt comfortable, but not empty. We started with simple things: work, old memories of high school days with her son, the way the neighborhood had changed. She laughed at one of my stories, tilting her head back just slightly, and I noticed how her laughter filled the room like music, gentle, unforced, carrying a sweetness I hadn't expected. But then, her smile faltered, just for a moment. She stared down into her teacup, swirling the spoon absent-mindedly. "It's funny," she said softly, almost as if she was speaking to herself, "how quickly the years slip by. One moment you're full of plans. The next, you're wondering when you stopped being part of the story and started just watching it happen." There was something in her voice, an ache, a quiet vulnerability, that pulled me in. I leaned forward a little, resting my elbows on the table. "I don't think you've stopped being part of it," I said gently. Sometimes we just forget to notice our own chapters until someone else points them out. She looked up at me then, her eyes searching mine. And for a moment, I swear it felt like she was seeing me. Not as her son's friend, not as a guest in her kitchen, but as someone who was really listening, someone who cared. Our hands both reached for the sugar bowl at the same time. Her fingers brushed against mine, light as silk, but instead of pulling away instantly, she left them there, just for a second. Long enough for me to feel the warmth of her skin, long enough to know she had felt it too. The air thickened, charged with something unspoken. Her eyes flickered down at our hands, then back up at me, and there was a softness there, hesitation mixed with something deeper, something she wasn't ready to name. Then she pulled her hand back with a small smile, covering the moment with a sip of tea. But the silence that followed wasn't empty. It was filled with all the words neither of us said aloud. And I knew, without a doubt, that tonight something had shifted. The next afternoon, she asked if I could help her bring in the groceries. My friend was still asleep upstairs, lost to the world as usual, and I welcomed the excuse to be useful. The sun was just beginning its slow descent, painting the driveway in gold when I followed her outside. The air smelled faintly of jasmine from the garden, and the bags waiting in the car were heavier than I expected. She laughed softly when I struggled with one, her voice carrying that low, melodic warmth I was quickly growing addicted to. "You're stronger than you look," she teased, closing the trunk with an easy swing of her hand. I smirked, adjusting the bag in my arms. "Guess I've been working out a little." We carried the bags side by side, the rhythm of our footsteps somehow in sync. For a while it was quiet, except for the crinkle of plastic and the occasional chirp of birds overhead. But it wasn't uncomfortable. There was something in the quiet with her, an awareness that pressed against the edges of ordinary moments, making them feel heavier, sharper. When we reached the kitchen, I set the bags down on the counter with a small exhale of relief. She placed hers down more gracefully, then leaned against the counter, brushing a loose strand of hair from her cheek. Her eyes lingered on me for just a second too long, and then, without warning, she laughed. "You know," she said, shaking her head a little, "you make me feel like I'm 20 again, full of energy, full of possibilities." The words slipped out so naturally, like she hadn't meant to say them aloud. And yet, once they were spoken, she didn't take them back. For a heartbeat, I didn't know how to respond. My chest tightened, my heart thudding louder than it should. She glanced away, busying herself with pulling out fruit from one of the bags, but I caught the faintest blush coloring her cheeks. Something stirred inside me at that moment, something both terrifying and exhilarating. I wasn't sure if I should laugh it off, tease her gently, or just let it hang there between us. Instead, I found myself speaking more softly than I intended. "I don't think age has anything to do with it," I said carefully. "You have this energy about you. It's not just youthful. It's alive." Her hands stilled on the counter. Slowly, she turned her head to look at me again, and in her eyes, there was a flicker of gratitude, maybe, or recognition. Or maybe it was something deeper, something neither of us had the courage to fully name yet. For a long moment, the kitchen felt smaller, the air thicker. It was just the two of us, standing there with bags of groceries, and yet it felt like the rest of the world had quietly stepped away to give us this space. She smiled then, a soft, almost shy curve of her lips. "You always did know how to say the right thing," she murmured, her voice low. I didn't move closer. I didn't have to, because in that moment, every glance, every pause, every unspoken word between us said more than actions ever could. And though the moment passed quickly, broken by the sound of my friend bounding down the stairs, it left a mark on me I knew wouldn't fade. Dinner was a lively affair, though not because of us. My friend was talking fast, caught up in some new story about his work, barely pausing for breath. I nodded along when needed, but my attention kept drifting, drawn, again and again, toward her. She moved around the kitchen with a kind of quiet rhythm, setting out dishes, checking the oven, making sure everything was perfect. There was nothing dramatic about it, nothing showy, and yet every movement caught me, like the way she brushed her hair behind her ear absent-mindedly, or how her fingertips lingered a moment longer on the rim of a wine glass before setting it down. When she asked me to help set the table, I stood quickly, maybe too quickly, but she didn't seem to notice. We moved side by side, filling the silence with little things, the placement of forks, the fold of napkins. Simple tasks, but each one brought me closer to her. It happened when we both reached for the same plate. Her hand was there first, cool porcelain beneath her fingers. Mine landed on top of hers, instinctive, unthinking. For a moment, neither of us moved. Her skin was warm, softer than I'd imagined. I felt the slight tremor of her pulse beneath my fingertips. And instead of pulling back quickly, as any polite, reasonable person would have, she hesitated. Just for a second. Long enough for the air between us to shift. I looked up, and her eyes were already on me. There was no smile this time, no mask of casual ease. Just her gaze, steady and searching, like she was trying to read something in me. Something I wasn't sure I could hide. The clatter of dishes, the sound of my friend moving around in the other room. All of it faded into the background. It was just her and me, standing close enough that I could feel the faint warmth radiating from her, close enough that I could smell the soft trace of her perfume lingering between us. My chest tightened, my breath caught. The world seemed to pause around that single touch. And then, her son's voice rang out from the living room, calling for her. The spell broke. She drew her hand back quickly, her cheeks flushing as she reached for another stack of plates, her movements suddenly brisk and careful. I stepped back too, though the ghost of her touch still lingered on my skin, refusing to fade. We finished setting the table in silence, though silence was hardly the right word. It wasn't empty. It was charged, filled with the weight of what almost happened, with the awareness that something had shifted again. When we finally sat down to eat, I caught her glance once or twice, fleeting but unmistakable. She didn't smile, not in the easy way she usually did. Instead, there was something else in her eyes, something cautious, something unspoken. And I knew, as I forced myself to focus on my friend's story, that I would remember the feel of her hand beneath mine long after tonight ended. The night after dinner was unusually quiet. My friend had gone out with others, leaving the house resting in a stillness that felt almost deliberate, almost expectant. I sat in the living room for a while, scrolling aimlessly through my phone, but the quiet pressed against me until I found myself wandering toward the back door. That's when I saw her. She was already outside, standing on the porch with her arms folded loosely, gazing out at the garden. The porch light cast a warm glow across her profile, softening the sharp edges of the night. Her face looked thoughtful, her expression touched by something I couldn't quite name. Longing, maybe, or the heaviness of memory. I hesitated at the doorway, unsure if I should disturb her. But before I could retreat, she turned and noticed me. Instead of looking surprised, she gave me a small, inviting smile. Couldn't sleep either? I shook my head and stepped outside. The air was cool, carrying the faint fragrance of jasmine and damp earth. Crickets sang somewhere in the distance, and the world felt hushed, like it was holding its breath for us. We started walking slowly down the garden path, side by side. The gravel crunched softly beneath our steps, and our shoulders brushed once, then again. Neither of us stepped away. At first, the conversation was light. She asked about my plans, my work, the little details of my life. I answered, but as the walk stretched on, the tone shifted. There was a softness in her voice, as if the night had peeled away the layers of formality and left only honesty behind. You know, she said quietly, eyes on the flowers along the edge of the path. Sometimes I feel like I've been living my life on autopilot, taking care of everything, making sure everyone else is fine. And somewhere along the way, I stopped asking if I was fine. Her words struck me, more deeply than I expected. I slowed my pace, turning just enough to see the faint shimmer in her eyes under the porch light. You deserve to feel seen, I said softly. Not just as a mother, not just as someone who keeps the house running, but as you. She stopped walking, her hand brushing against my arm. This time it wasn't casual. It lingered, warm against the fabric of my sleeve. She looked up at me, her lips parting as if she wanted to say something more but wasn't sure if she should. Instead, she laughed gently, though her laughter was tinged with something fragile. You always know how to say the things I didn't realize I needed to hear. The sound of her laugh, the weight of her hand on my arm, the cool night air. It all blurred together into a moment I didn't want to end. We stood there, just two figures in the garden, with the stars hidden behind clouds and the world spinning quietly beyond us. And though nothing more was said, I felt it, the invisible thread tightening between us, pulling us closer with every unspoken word. The next day felt different. Maybe it was because of the walk in the garden, or maybe it was because neither of us could quite forget the way her hand had rested on my arm. Whatever it was, the air between us carried a quiet tension, as if every word and gesture held more meaning than it should. That evening, we found ourselves alone again. My friend had left to meet some colleagues, and the house was still, the hum of the refrigerator the only sound in the kitchen. She was at the counter, rinsing a bowl of fruit, while I leaned against the opposite side, pretending to scroll on my phone but watching her out of the corner of my eye. There was something in the way she moved, graceful, but heavy, like she was carrying thoughts she didn't want to put into words. Finally, she broke the silence. You know this thing between us. She paused, her hands lingering under the water longer than necessary. It shouldn't exist. Her words were quiet, but they landed heavy. I set my phone down, searching her face. Why not? She turned, drying her hands on a towel. Because it's complicated. Because you're young and I'm not. Because people wouldn't understand. And because... She stopped, her voice catching. She closed her eyes for a moment, steadying herself. Because it scares me how easy it is to be around you. I stepped closer, not enough to close the distance, but enough that she could feel the shift in the air. Does it scare you? I asked softly. Because it feels wrong? Or because it feels right? Her eyes opened, meeting mine with a mixture of defiance and vulnerability. Both, she whispered. For a moment, we just stood there, caught in the gravity of everything unspoken. She pressed her hand lightly against her chest, as though steadying her heartbeat. And without thinking too much, I reached out and gently took her other hand in mine. Her fingers were cool from the water, but they tightened slightly around mine, as if her heart had betrayed her words. You're not too old, I said, my voice low, steady. You're you. And when I look at you, I don't see age. I see someone who makes me feel calm, alive, like I belong right here. She let out a trembling breath, her thumb tracing faint circles against my skin. An unconscious gesture, soft and almost tender. It was a confession without words, a quiet surrender she didn't dare make aloud. But then, as quickly as it came, she pulled her hand back, shaking her head. You don't know what you're saying. You don't know what this could cost. Her words were firm, but her eyes betrayed her. They lingered on me, soft and searching, filled with everything she was trying not to admit. And in that silence, I knew her hesitation wasn't rejection. It was fear. Fear of the world. Fear of what others might think. Fear of how much she already cared. And fear, most of all, of how much I did too. The night before I was supposed to leave, the house felt different. Maybe it was just me, carrying the weight of everything unsaid between us. But there was a quietness, a heaviness in the air that pressed against me. I sat on the edge of the guest bed, staring at my packed bag, trying to convince myself that leaving would make things easier. But the truth was, nothing felt easy anymore. Not after the way she looked at me, not after the way her hand had lingered in mine, trembling yet unwilling to let go. I heard a soft knock at the door. Before I could answer, it opened slightly, and there she was, standing in the doorway, her hair falling in loose waves over her shoulders. Her expression caught somewhere between courage and hesitation. Can I come in? She asked quietly. I nodded, my throat suddenly dry. She stepped inside and closed the door behind her, her hands clasped loosely in front of her. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The silence wasn't empty. It was thick, charged with everything we'd been holding back. "I wanted to say goodbye," she said finally. Her voice was steady, but her eyes gave her away. There was a softness there, a glimmer of something fragile. "I didn't want tomorrow morning to be rushed or unfinished." I stood, unsure of what to do with my hands, with the emotions rising inside me. "I'm glad you came," I managed. For a moment, we just stood facing each other. Then, almost without thinking, she stepped forward. Slowly, carefully, she wrapped her arms around me. It wasn't a casual hug. It was firm, lingering, full of unspoken words. Her cheek rested against my chest, and in the stillness I felt the quiet steadiness of her heartbeat against mine. I closed my eyes, letting the warmth of her embrace sink into me, memorizing it. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice muffled against my shirt, "for reminding me that I'm still me, that I can still feel something." I tightened my arms around her, wishing the moment would never end. "You're more than you realize," I whispered back. "Not just who you used to be, but who you are now. And that's enough. More than enough." She pulled back just slightly, enough to look up at me. Her eyes shimmered, not with tears exactly, but with something deeper, a kind of acceptance, a kind of peace. For a long moment, we just stayed there, suspended in silence, our hands still holding on to each other like neither of us wanted to let go. And then, with a soft, almost reluctant smile, she let her hand slip from mine. "Take care of yourself," she said. "And don't forget, you'll always have a place here." I nodded, my chest heavy but warm. "I won't forget." When she left the room, the quiet returned. But it didn't feel lonely. It felt like something had been planted between us. Something gentle, unspoken, and enduring. Not a reckless promise. Not a dramatic vow. Just the kind of bond that lingers quietly in the heart, waiting for the right moment to return. Speech balloon, if this story touched you, let me know in the comments. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Don't forget to like the video, subscribe, and share it with someone who enjoys heartfelt age gap romances. Your support helps me keep creating more stories like this for you.